It's a great honor to be asked to give the Murray Rothbard Memorial Lecture. One of the most poignant lines from the movie and the play Amadeus for me was, if God spoke to man, he would speak to man through the music of Mozart. And Mozart is one of my favorite composers. And I guess I would like to extrapolate from that and say that if God spoke to man in economics or political theory, he would speak to us, through the words of Murray Rothbard. I took a long time to think about what I might say about Murray, or in his honor. And my first thought was, I'd try to be a stand-up comic and storyteller and regale you with stories of how I first met Murray in 1962. No, I guess it was 1965. I'm not a historian. And how I met him, the relationship we had, some of the high points, some of the interesting points. Let me just tell you one of those. When I was a young lad, I used to keep track of how many pages I would write per day. And if I wrote 5 per day, that is double-spaced typewritten pages of about 300 words on a page, I figured I did okay. And many days I didn't make it to 5. But sometimes I'd make it to 10 or 15 if I really had a good day. Well, one day I got up really early in the morning. I stayed up till 3 in the morning the next day, and I got 22 pages done. And, you know, filled with youthful braggadocio, I called up Murray, and I said, well, how many pages do you do in a day? And he goes, "Rah, rah, who cares? I don't care. I never count. Rah, rah, leave me alone." I used to pester the hell out of him. I'm amazed that he was friendly toward me. So finally, I'm a world-class nudge, so if you get in my face, you're in trouble. I'll come get you. Finally, I got out of him what he said was 8 pages an hour. So in my most productive day, I did 22 pages. I did almost 3 hours of Murray. And you could see from the width of the books on the shelf that he's produced that, you know, a good typist can do 8 pages and maybe a little more, but, you know, he's really clacking away, and it comes out first draft, pretty much. It's just appalling and amazing. I decided not to keep going with these stories, rather to give something more substantive as a better way to honor him. And then the problem is, how do you honor him? What can you say about him? Because he's so accomplished in so many different fields. For me, though, the essence of Murray is libertarianism. The reason I was tempted to give all these stories is that my thought is that many people in this room, maybe half the people, have not met Murray and only know him through his writings and maybe his tape-recorded speeches. And as the years go on, there are fewer and fewer people that have had personal experience with him. And it's more and more important for people such as myself who have to share it with you. And if you see me over coffee later, I'll regale you with the stories. But now I wanted to get into some substance. And for me, the essence of Murray was Mr. Libertarian. It was not for nothing that he was widely called Mr. Libertarian. Further, he approached this in, I would say, and I mean this as a compliment, in a rabid, maniacal way. He was no pinko type of libertarian, of which there are all too many. I warn you, the pinkoism stops right here. If you define libertarianism, I think, non-controversially as the non-aggression axiom in private property rights coupled with a Lockean homesteading theory, the essence of Murray was not that he adhered to that. Many libertarians do. Heck, many non-libertarians do. If you ask them, do you favor violence against non-aggressors, they're not going to say yes. It's rather the rigid, unyielding, praxeological way that he followed this that I think is the quintessential Murray. He was seen, though, as inconsistent. He was anti-war, so he was seen as a leftist. He was in favor of laissez-faire capitalism, so he was seen as a right-winger. He was for anarchism, so he was seen as a leftist. He joined the Peace and Freedom Party, which was obviously a left activity. But this was alliances. Murray, for strategic reasons, would join with other groups at various times in his life when his views and theirs coincided. And I certainly see nothing wrong with that. One of the things that Murray did, and here what I'm going to do is to extend on Murray. Lou Rockwell asked, what am I going to be speaking on today? And I told him a defense, elucidation, and extension of Murray's thinking. Well, one of the things that he did was his attack on the modals, and I'm going to try to elaborate and extend on that. Who are the modals? The modal libertarians are people who are libertarian on many issues, but on, say, on victimless crimes, left-wing libertarians, so-called, they would argue from the fact that you should legalize drugs, which I think is perfectly plumb line, to the fact that somehow you should use drugs, which is very different. He would, these modals would argue from the fact that we shouldn't put people in jail who engage in weird sexual practices, that somehow we all ought to be engaging in these practices, which again is, a little bit off. And I think Murray did yeoman work in this, as he did everywhere. The only possible change I would suggest is, why give them the honorific of libertarian? Why call them left-wing libertarians on these issues? Yes, they're libertarian on other issues, but on these issues they're just crazy, or they're just misunderstanding. Now I want to read something, an email I got from Lou Rockwell. I'm not sure who wrote this, whether it was Mark Fulwiler. I think it's Mark Fulwiler to Lou Rockwell, about the Lincoln cult. And he says to Lou, "You don't get Liberty Magazine, do you? There is a fawning review of it, a fawning review in it of a book on Lincoln that shows that the Lincoln cult is alive and well among so-called libertarians. The gist of the reviewer's argument is that Lincoln said he was against slavery, therefore he's a great guy." But the point that I want to focus on is he calls them so-called libertarians. And I would be much more comfortable with calling them so-called libertarians, or quasi-libertarians, or semi-libertarians. I mean, Milton Friedman calls himself a libertarian, and if he calls himself a libertarian, we've got a lot of troubles, because he's very different than plumb line libertarianism. So I would be happy to accord them these other words, or libertarian on some issues, but not on the issues where we're disagreeing. What I want to do today is not talk about modals, though. I want to talk about people who are so-called right-wing libertarians, and I'm coining a new phrase, and if anyone has a better word for it, let me know, and I'll use it in my next talk on this. Instead of the modals, I want to call them the schmodals. So who are the schmodals? Well, the schmodals are to libertarianism, as are the modals to libertarianism, only when the modals deviate, they deviate on the left, the schmodals on the right. And the reason I think it's important is that while Murray himself had distinguished himself from the schmodals, mainly on the war and peace issue, somehow it hasn't resonated as much in our community as his wonderful work on the modals. So I want to get the schmodals, and I want to get them under the topic of 4 headings, and I'll try to illustrate my point under these following 4 headings. 1, war and peace. 2, abortion. 3, reparations. And 4, misuse of language in the economics profession, for want of a better word. Okay, let me start with war and peace. LouRockwell.com has done yeoman work on this issue. Certainly an honorable mention goes to Justin Raimondo's anti-war column. Both of them have done heroic work. Both of them have been unpopular in many circles. I somehow think that Murray is up there somewhere smiling at these efforts. In my view, what we had been calling the Department of Defense never should have been called the Department of Defense, because if you go by what they did but not by what they were called, they should be called the Department of Offense. If you take a Martian eye view of this, if you're a Martian looking down on the Earth and not knowing anything about anything, but you can just recognize who is who, and you want to figure out who is the aggressor nation, you have to ask yourself such things as, well, who's got military bases on foreign territories? Who's got sailors and soldiers all over ships all over the globe? Who used the nuclear bomb on civilians? War is the health of the state, says Randolph Bourne, and I think that's true. We have rent control, price controls, business subsidies, economic regulation, and many other objectionable things because of war. War doesn't create these things, or rather war creates these things. These things don't create war. So if we're for free enterprise, we have to be at least biased in favor of anti-war or peace. There is such a thing as just war. There are defensive wars. But my claim is that the U.S. is an invading power. It's not a defensive power. It's true that we've had civilians of ours killed, but there were many civilians that we've been killing all over the world. Yes, defense, just war, secession, but the world's policeman, I think, is what we've become, and this is unjustified. This is incompatible with libertarian theory. I take a reasonable expression of the libertarian view on foreign policy is George Washington's farewell address, where he warned us against getting involved in entangling alliances and advised us to take on a peace policy. Yes, we can criticize modals like the Cato Institute for making modal mistakes, but they also make schmodal mistakes. And the schmodal mistakes, I think, are more important, if anything, than the modal mistakes. Similarly with the Wall Street Journal, that's not a mispronunciation, they make left-wing mistakes, yes, but they also make right-wing ones. My point is we're neither. We're neither left-wing nor right-wing. We're plumb-line libertarians, or at least that's what Murray was, and that's what I intend to engage in. This, for me, is an exercise in product differentiation. We are distinct from them. We are a precious flower. We don't want to be conflated with left-wing semi-libertarians or quasi-libertarians, nor with right-wing ones. Okay, having briefly treated War and Peace, let me move to my second issue. My second issue is abortion. Now, the right-wingers take a pro-life position. The left-wingers take a pro-choice position. I think libertarians have a distinct position from all of them, from both of them. We have what I call the evictionist theory, namely that the woman has the right not to kill the fetus that she doesn't want, but to evict it from her body, since she is the private property rights owner of the body, and the fetus that is in her when it's unwanted is, in effect, a parasite, an invader, a trespasser. Now, some of you may or may not follow me along on these principled arguments that I'm now to give, but I also have a pragmatic one, which I hope will convince you, if not the philosophical one. Okay, I start the analysis with when does life begin? Start at the beginning. This is an intractable position. It's sort of a continuum problem. Many people have great debates over this one. My read on this is that the life begins with the fertilized egg. As soon as the egg is fertilized, that's it. That's life. Why do I take this position? I take this position for two reasons. I'm going to have to take off my coat. This stuff is no heavy lifting here, but it's hot work. Why do I take this position? One reason, a philosophical reason that I take this position is that I am going to come out in favor of a pro-choice position, at least in principle. Therefore, I want to make it hardest for myself to assume that the baby is an alive human being baby at the fertilized egg stage. The second reason is, to me, if you compare suppose there are two twins. A mother is giving birth to twins, and the first twin came out, and the second twin is still inside. According to the present law, as I understand it, if you engage in any violence against the twin who's already been born, you're guilty of assault and battery or murder or whatever you do. Whereas if you do something to the baby that's inside, like the partial birth abortion business, it's okay because it's just like a protoplasm or something like that. And yet the babies are like 6 minutes apart from being born. And, you know, they're pretty close, it seems to me. Whereas the difference between a fertilized egg and an unfertilized egg is widely different. Namely, one will not grow into a human being and the other will, and that seems to me to be a big distinction. But I'll rely on the first one. I'll rely on both, actually, that I want to make it hardest for myself so that I can overcome the highest obstacles in my analysis. Abortion, one of the reasons I think we have problems with the abortion analysis is that it's a complex word. Abortion means two things. Abortion means eviction plus killing. Let me say that again because it's crucial, it's absolutely important. Abortion is not just eviction, it's not just killing, it's both. So you really shouldn't be talking about abortion, or if you do, you should be careful to distinguish between the two constituent elements of it. killing and eviction. And my claim is that eviction is justified always since it's the mother's property, but never killing, murder. Of course, the eviction always has to be done in the gentlest manner possible. If there's a trespasser who comes into the Mises Institute and the Mises people don't want him here, the first thing they can't first just plug him. I mean, I'm pretty rabid, but you know, but even I am not that rabid because that's not libertarian rabidity. I'm a libertarian rabid person. The first thing is the softest way to eject him. It's only if all else fails then you can use violence, because if he persists then he's violating your property rights, and property rights come first. Now, I admit that 100 years ago there was no difference worth making in practical terms between abortion and eviction. The only way to evict 100 years ago, even in the gentlest manner possible, is to kill the baby, because we didn't have scientific technology which would allow us to evict in a non-harmful way. I stipulate that 100 years from now it'll be possible to evict without harming the baby in any manner, shape, or form, to evict the baby without hurting it at all. Right now we're in some sort of intermediate stage where we can evict at certain stages, in the late-term pregnancy stages, without much harm or without any harm to the baby. But at earlier stages, the baby will be harmed if we evict. So the libertarian position is that you can evict but not kill. My claim is that right now, those of us who are pro-life in our desires, who don't like the prospect of millions of fetuses, millions of people being killed, would do well to adopt this policy of mine, evictionism, even if you don't follow me so far, and I'll be considering objections to what I said, because the present system isn't working. The present system is a failure. All the pro-life people in the world have not been able to succeed in getting us to a position where we don't have this slaughter of innocent people. And I use that word advisedly. Whereas if we adopt evictionism right now, we will be making a compromise. The eviction position is a compromise. See, the pro-life, what I have in my notes here is a chart. Evict, kill, and the pro-life people say, no, don't evict, and no, don't kill. The pro-choice people say, yes, evict, and yes, kill. Whereas the evictionists say, yes, evict, and no, kill. So it is a compromise. So if we adopt this compromise, this means that right now we will be giving assent to the killing of some innocent people, namely, say, in the 1st to the 6th month. Just pick that number as an arbitrary number. I don't know what the medical technology is now. Whereas at least we'll be saving people in their 7th, 8th, and 9th month. So we'll save some of the people. But the genius, if I may say so, of this argument is that as time progresses, every decade that goes on, we might save another month. So in 1 decade from now, it'll go to the 5th month, and 2 decades to the 4th month, etc. And eventually, we will have what we want, we pro-life people who want to save human beings who are very young. Whereas if we stick with the present, we're going to lose, and we'll always lose, and we won't have a compromise, and we won't be winning in the future either. So I say, let's at least, even if you don't agree with me, let's take a part of a loaf, because that loaf will be getting bigger as time goes on, and eventually medical technology will solve this problem if we adopt the compromise. But if we don't adopt the compromise, my prognostication is that we'll just endlessly have this slaughter of people. Okay, now let me consider a few objections to my argument. First, there's this airplane trip business, that I invite you on my airplane and we're up at 37,000 feet and I say, by the way, this airplane is my private property and get the hell off. And you say, well, how about a parachute? I say, no, that's positive obligations, you're trespassing, get off. The gentlest manner possible, please leave. But if you don't, I'm going to give you a little push. This is one argument against my thesis, and my rejection of this is as follows, that what we really have here is an argument over implicit contracts. My claim is that there is an implicit contract when someone invites you on the plane that they're going to land you. Look, if you go into the restaurant and order a cup of coffee and they present a bill for that cup of coffee of $5 million, this is a violation of the implicit contract. So now the question is, what is the implicit contract in the case of birth? Well, my claim is that for to be an implicit contract, there have to be at least two contracting parties. And at the time of intercourse, if you forget about the father, and the father only comes into this necessarily if there's some sort of contract, Mary Lou White or whoever she was about the birth for pay, there's only the mother and the fetus in the eviction or the abortion scenario. And there cannot be a contract between the mother and the fetus, even an implicit one, because at the time of intercourse, there's only a separate sperm and a separate egg. There is no fertilized egg for there to be a contract with. So I claim that this argument fails. Another one has to do with positive obligations. One of the essences of libertarianism is I understand that there are no positive obligations. So let's talk a little bit about this stem cell research business. Here you have a lot of fertilized eggs, and people are attempting to experiment with them, that is, kill them. And my claim is that if you are, or take a, before I get into that, take a case, there was this case in, well, let me get off the case in Canada. Just take a case where I have a baby and I don't want to feed it anymore, and I just leave it in bed, and I don't feed it and I let it starve to death. Have I committed a libertarian crime in not notifying other people that here is a baby that I'm no longer willing to take care of? Now, the libertarian view of babies and ownership is you never can own another human being. I'm not going to get into voluntary slavery, that's a different issue. You can't own another human being. You can only own the homesteading rights to it, namely the right to bring it up. And how do you get the homesteading rights to bring up the baby? Well, by giving birth to it, and then by caring for it, taking care of it. So as soon as you're unwilling to take care of it anymore, like you want to now starve it, you've now lost your rights to homestead it. But is it a positive obligation that you have to go off and notify someone in the common law tradition? My understanding is that the unwanted baby would be put on the church steps or given to the hospital or given to some charitable organization. My claim is that this is compatible with the libertarian opposition to positive obligations, and here's my argument. It has to do with forestalling. Now, you have to get back into homesteading theory. The point of homesteading theory is to get all unowned property into the hands of people, and then we can have a free market with buying and selling. But suppose what I do is I homestead an area of land that sort of looks like a bagel. It's, say, 100 miles wide. The bagel part is 100 miles wide. And inside, the hole in the bagel is, say, 100 square miles. Am I allowed to do that? My claim is that I'm not. Because if I do that, I'm forestalling the rest of you from getting into that 100-mile square area, which is the hole in the bagel. Assuming that there's no technology to dig under my land or to build a bridge over it, I'm precluding you, I'm forestalling you from unowned property. And this is illegitimate. I have to allow you access or egress into there, otherwise I'm violating what I take to be libertarian homesteading theory. In other words, I think we libertarians have two problems with Locke. One, he had this nonsense about leaving as much and as good for anyone else. Nonsense. You grab it all, anything you can homestead. And two, he didn't have this forestalling theory. Now let's get back to the baby. What you're doing with that baby that you don't tell anyone else about, that you're keeping starving, you're forestalling other people from taking over that baby. Now we get to the stem cell case, and to me it's a race. If you don't want to take care of a baby, or if you don't want to take care of a fertilized egg, what you have to do under the Libertarian Legal Code, as I understand it, is notify other people that here is a human being, young one, that I have the rights to keep as long as I feed it and care for it, but I'm not going to feed it and care for it. And it's only if no one in the rest of the world wants to take care of it, then you're justified in killing it. There was a case in Canada where a man killed his 10-year-old girl who was very, very sick with all sorts of diseases. My analysis of that is, if he would have first notified everyone else that he no longer wishes to care for her, and no one else in the 6 billion people on the earth around said, oh, I'll take her, then he could have killed her, and it would have been consistent with libertarianism. But he didn't do that notification. So the stem cell people have to notify the pro-life people and say, look, here we have these fertilized eggs. If no one takes them, we're going to kill them. We're going to experiment with them. And now it's a race. Can they build more fertilized eggs than the demand? It's sort of a race between the supply and the demand side. And I wrote this on the Lew Rockwell web, and I got hundreds of letters saying, you know, you're a jerk, that was the kindest thing. And there was some young lad whose name I don't remember, but I credit him in the article that I'm writing on this. If he's here, please let him say who he is. No, I guess he's not here, but it's in my article. What he said is, look, the pro-life people don't have to promise to bring up all these fertilized eggs. All they have to do is promise to freeze them. Freezing them would be to keep them alive, and maybe in 20 years we'll have the technology to keep them alive. So my understanding of the libertarian position on stem cell research is that there will not be any, because my empirical prediction is that the pro-life types will be able to put in freezers any number that the experimental types want to create. Okay, another point is on the philosophical business is that all fetuses have the same rights. And in the case of pregnancy due to rape, there's not even the possibility of a contract, because rape, by definition, is coercive activity. And if that baby has rights to live, then all babies have rights to live, since they all have equal rights. Okay, let me end this section again with my pragmatic point, because I think that's the strongest in many people's view. It would be better to adopt the libertarian, as I see it, evictionism theory, which was really Murray's theory, even if you don't agree with it philosophically, because of the pragmatic elements of it. Namely, as time goes on, we will save more and more people, young people, and eventually we'll save them all, medical technology willing. Okay, and my third point is reparations. Now, there's this guy, Randall Robinson, floating around, who is saying that all blacks should get reparations, and it's trillions of dollars from all whites, and all blacks should get reparations from all whites, whether the whites were here or not. If you're a guy from Portugal and you come over to this country now, you owe reparations since you're white. If you're a black person who comes from somewhere else, you are owed reparations even though you were never enslaved here, even though your grandparents weren't. And in reaction, people like David Horowitz, Mike Levin, and Paul Craig Roberts have written missives saying that these people are all wrong. These people, Horowitz, Levin, and Roberts, I take as schmodals. They are right-wing, semi-libertarians. And what I'm now going to do is, in a continuing effort to distinguish libertarians from right-wing types or conservatives, is to criticize their views. I think their views are better than Randall Robinson's, but just because I don't agree with Randall Robinson doesn't mean I agree with the conservatives. Okay, so let's get into this return of stolen property business. What's going on here? Many of the conservatives think that reparations is anti-property rights. That per se, if you have a reparation, you're against property rights. To my way of thinking, nothing could be further from the truth. Rather, reparations are part and parcel of private property rights. Reparations are merely the return of stolen property through time. If I steal somebody's watch, David is sitting in the front here, and if I grab his watch and I'm forced to return it, that would be consistent with property rights. Now, suppose I steal his watch and I keep it, and we both die, and I give it to my grandson. And his grandson comes to my grandson and says, that's Grandpa David's watch to my grandson, give it back. In the ordinary course of events, had Walter not stolen the watch from David, David's grandson would have had it. Instead, Walter's grandson has it. Now, to me, it matters not one whit whether I return the watch to David or my grandson returns the watch to his grandson. In both cases, private property rights are being respected, not denigrated. So don't think that reparations are somehow incompatible with private property rights. Now, of course, David's grandson the burden of proof is upon him if he wants to make this claim, because the burden of proof is on he who wants to overturn property. Possession is 9/10 of the law. The extant property owner is assumed to be the rightful property owner unless and until someone can undermine this. And one way to undermine this is to show a picture of the grandfather with the watch, or an inscription or something like that, and that would be evidence, and then you would have to force my grandson to return the watch to David, because we have a picture of David, blatantly wearing his watch. Say that would be the evidence. Okay, it's pretty clear with watches. What about slavery? Well, slavery, and again, I'm not talking about voluntary slavery, I'm talking about this slavery that occurred in this country before 1865, was theft. Libertarians analyze these things, I think, in that way. We regard murder as the theft of a life. We regard slavery as the theft of labor services. Well, what should have happened in 1866 or 1865, whenever the War of Northern Aggression ended, or the First War of Southern Secession, I think, as it's being called now. What should have happened then was that the bad guys, the slave owners, should have been forced to compensate the slaves. One, the rabid vision would have been that they should have been enslaved by the slaves, because this 2 teeth for a tooth as punishment theory. At least the crime for kidnapping is to be kidnapped. The crime for slave holding or slave owning is to be enslaved. That would seem to be just. But these people are beyond our reach. They've all died, and it's 2002. We can't get them. But there are plantations, mainly in the South, but few in the North too. It doesn't matter where they are. There are plantations that those guys had. When they should have been enslaved, those plantations should have gone to the slaves. The slaves were the proper owners of it. They built it, or at least large parts of it should have gone to them. Instead, those plantations and acreages stayed with the white children, or the white slave owners, and then their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren are now the owners of it. And there are great-grandchildren of black slaves. And if it's justified for David's grandson to come to my grandson and get his grandfather's watch back, then it is also justified, I claim, for the black great-grandchild to come to the white great-grandchild and say, look, those plantations that you got from your grandfather, you never should have got from him in the first place. I don't consider you a criminal. You didn't engage in slave owning. But you're now holding land and property and plantations that you never should have got from your grandfather in inheritance, and should have gone to my grandfather, and he would have given it to me in inheritance. Okay, what's wrong with this? What's some criticisms with this? One of them is that this is ex post facto law, because at that time slavery was legal. But I don't believe in legal positivism. Whatever the law is right. I'm a libertarian. I believe that libertarian law is the proper law now and in the future and in the past. I believe in the Nuremberg trials, which was also ex post facto. According to Nazi law, it was okay for the Nazis to do it. It was a virtue for them to do what they did. According to U.S. law, it was a virtue to, or at least legal, to own a slave. I don't give a fig for that law. I have a higher law in mind. It's the libertarian law, and I'm willing to go to any society that's incompatible with libertarian law as a libertarian and say, your law is wrong, the libertarian law is right, we're going to set things right. And time doesn't matter. There's no statute of limitations on justice. There's another claim of mine, which is obviously debatable. Now, this is a very radical philosophical position that I'm putting forth before you. However, the effects of this would be rather less radical, more conservative. Don't think that all the property rights that somehow the Indians once had will go back to them, or that all the plantations will go back to them, because I return again to the position of possession is 9/10 of the law, and the burden of proof is on he who would overturn property rights. And the point is that 150 years later, it's hard to meet this burden of proof. There might be a few cases where some black person can come up with a Bible that lists, the grandfather and which plantation they were on, and can say, look, this is proof. This is written proof, and we're going to claim our 1/500th of that plantation, given that there were 500 slaves, and my grandfather, or the black grandfather, was one of those slaves. Now, the conservatives say it's okay for Japanese Americans, for Cubans, for Soviet people, the people in East Germany to have reparations for the property that was stolen from them by the communist regimes. But somehow it's not okay for blacks or Indians or whoever it is. And it seems to be the idea that if the people are still alive, then you can have it. But if they've died, then somehow the reparations are not valid. But on the assumption that the inheritance would go along racial lines, I think it's very clear who is the legitimate owner of those things. I want to read a quote from Murray Rothbard on this. And he says, suppose that Jones is now the white grandson, although Murray is talking about a watch, and I'll be talking about land. Suppose that Jones is not the criminal, not the man who stole the watch, but that he had inherited or had innocently purchased it from the thief. And suppose, of course, that neither the victim nor his heirs can be found. In that case, the disappearance of the victim means that the stolen property comes properly into a state of non-ownership. Non-ownership. But we have seen that any good in a state of non-ownership with no legitimate owner of its own, of its title, reverts as a legitimate property to the first person who comes along and uses it. Would you like a cough drop, sir?
Oh, thank you, Walter.
You're welcome. They don't call me Doc Block for nothing. You know, they say if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, all I have is cough drops, and I'm trying to cure the ills of the world. Where was I? But we have seen that any good in a state of non-ownership with no legitimate owner of its title reverts as legitimate property to the first person to come along and use it, to appropriate this now unowned resource for human use. But this first person is clearly Jones, the white grandson or son, who had been using it all along. Therefore, we conclude that even though the property was originally stolen, that if the victim or his heirs cannot be found, and if the current possessor was not the actual criminal who stole the property, then title to that property belongs properly, justly, and ethically to its current possessor. To sum up, for any property currently claimed and used, A, if we know clearly that there was no criminal origin to its current title, then obviously the current title is legitimate, just, and valid. B, if we don't know whether the current title had any criminal origins but can't find out either way, then the hypothetically unowned property reverts instantaneously and justly to its current possessor. C, if we do know that the title is originally criminal but can't find the victim or his heirs, then C1, if the current title holder was not the criminal aggressor against the property, then it reverts to him justly as the first owner of the hypothetically unowned property. But C2, if the current title holder is himself the criminal or one of the criminals who stole the property, then clearly he is properly to be deprived of it, and then it reverts to the first man who takes it out of his unowned state and appropriates it for his use. And finally D, and here's the relevant case, if the current title is the result of crime and the victim or his heirs can be found, then the title properly reverts immediately to the latter without compensation to the criminal or to the other holders of the unjust title. So the white grandson is not a criminal, but his title to that property is illegitimate if it can be proved that it was the property of someone else, would be the way I would interpret that. Black reparation leaders ought to embrace libertarianism. I'll wait on that. First, it'll help blacks apart from reparations. See, the view of Milton Friedman and other utilitarians is a weird one. His view is that, look, land is only 10% of the GDP, give or take. So why all the fuss over reparation of land? Let them keep it. You get more welfare, economic benefit for blacks if instead of worrying about reparations, you worried about minimum wages or unions or tariffs or whatever. And he's probably right. But the word justice and the word Milton Friedman don't belong in the same sentence. He doesn't understand what justice is. It's true that it may not be utilitarian to insist upon reparations, but libertarians aren't utilitarians. We don't care if it's utilitarian or not. We're asking, is it just? And I've debated with him on this, and he just has the gene for justice missing from him or something. Okay, so the first reason that they ought to embrace libertarianism, is that it'll help blacks apart from reparations. Secondly, it supports their claim on principle, whereas the conservatives reject their claim on principle. And thirdly, that in some very few cases in practice, there'll actually be some transfer of plantations from whites to blacks. Okay, now I'm going to consider objections from Levin, Horowitz, and Roberts. Quote from Levin, quote, "Pay back for manumitted slaves is owed only by their former owners," unquote. Pay back for manumitted slaves is owed only by their former owners. My claim is no, grandsons too. Why not those grandsons? They've got the stuff illegitimately, if it can be proven, which in most cases it can't. But if it can, why not? Okay, second, Horowitz. Now, Horowitz has 10 points, many of which I agree with about it, and I won't mention those. But there's an interesting thing. Well, I mean, in the interest of time, I don't want to say, oh, point 3 I agree, point 4 I agree. Now, these 10 points have an interesting background. What he did is he put these, or he didn't put these, he asked the newspapers at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and all those great places to run his 10 points opposing Randall Robinson, and they all refused, or virtually all refused, and then he made a big fuss of this. So conservatives aren't all bad. This was good that he showed the Harvard, Princeton, and Yale types for what they are. But now let me talk about the points that he makes. First, blacks first enslaved blacks. Namely, the first enslavers of blacks were blacks. And for Horowitz, this is a reductio. Well, it might be a reductio to Randall Robinson's thesis, but it's certainly not a reductio to the libertarian theory of reparations. So what if blacks own blacks? This is not a racist kind of a thing that if you're black you owe or you don't owe. It's you owe if your grandfather stole from my grandfather. Well, if a black was a slave owner, then that black's grandson owes the other black who had the grandfather who was the slave. So it's no reductio for the libertarian position. The second one is Randall Robinson says all whites benefited from slavery, all blacks were harmed. Horowitz says whites didn't benefit. My way of thinking is it's irrelevant whether you benefit or not. Benefit is not the key. Theft is the key. Look, if there's a frost in California, the orange growers in Florida benefit. But they don't owe anything just because you benefit. Right? Isn't that right? Look, I take a shower once a month whether I need it or not, and you people benefit. Mere benefit or loss is irrelevant. It's theft that concerns the libertarian. Another one is black income in the U.S. is greater than in black income in Africa. There's another benefit. Well, it's true. Black income in the U.S. is better than black income in Africa, and in some sense, we did the blacks a favor by enslaving them. It's not something that I advocate as a libertarian, but it's something that ex post I can look back upon and say, yes, Horowitz is right. However, this benefit doesn't matter. Suppose a man rapes a woman, and it's later proven that had he not raped her, she would have been run over by a truck. Well, he benefited her. Right? I mean, this isn't politically correct, so don't tell the people where you shouldn't. But just because he benefited doesn't mean that he's not guilty of rape. So benefit schmenefit, that's irrelevant. Okay, another one is that there are a lot of rich blacks, according to Horowitz, like Oprah Winfrey. She's rich. Who can deny that? She's rich. Therefore, she doesn't deserve to have property returned to her that was stolen from her grandfather. Now, this is outright Marxist egalitarianism, right? That if you're rich, you're not owed. You can't be a rich creditor. I mean, that's the depths of depravity that these conservatives, these schmodals, would be dragging us down to. They don't speak for us. Another one is that welfare has occurred, and this was already, in other words, what he's saying is that reparations have already taken place in the form of welfare. And my view is, well, first of all, this welfare wasn't reparations. It was reparations with an asterisk. When we gave them this welfare, we insisted that there be no man in the house, which ruined the black family. And according to Charles Murray, that business with the frog, if you put the frog in boiling water, it'll jump out. Slavery was like boiling water. The black family jumped right out of that. The black family was just as intact as the white family within a percentage point or two after slavery, up until the welfare system came in, and that's sort of like boiling the frog slowly. And the welfare system ruined the black family. Now the incidence of illegitimacy in some cities is 70% among blacks. Also, it wasn't reparations because it came from the entire society and it went to all blacks, or went to all poor people, and blacks were overrepresented among poor people. That's not return of stolen property. Return of stolen property is you have to prove with some written proof that your grandfather was a slave here and that this guy has got that plantation and give it back. Another one is that war was over secession, not slavery, as we learned from Tom DiLorenzo and Jeff Hummel and other people. Another one is that the northern soldiers helped get rid of slavery, and therefore that was part of reparations. But just because some whites helped some blacks doesn't mean that the whites who owe money paid the blacks who are owed money. Again, that's the sort of racism business. Now, I'm almost out of time, and I have this long, long thing about Roberts, and I'm going to skip that. He's a jerk. We don't have to. And I want to get to my fourth topic, and that's this economic schmodals. Now, the chief economic schmodals from whom we have to distinguish ourselves, especially at George Mason University and other places like that, are the public choices. Tom DiLorenzo and I have published, I think, 3 articles on this stuff, and we've got 2 more in the pipeline. And one of the problems with public choice is they are trying to, or their intellectual strength is having the effect of submerging Austrianism or submerging libertarian economics. Language is important, and if these guys are perverting language, just like the feminists are perverting language, then it tides ill for us. I mean, if the feminists had their way, we couldn't say he. We'd have to say he or she. Well, that's the modals. The schmodals are doing something also even more insidious, because I think more people are aware of the danger of he and she and all than they are of, let me give you a few examples. The first one is rent-seeking. What you mean by rent-seeking is theft. The way this word is used, it's theft. And yet you're using the ancient and honorable word of rent collection. You're demeaning landlords, or if you're talking about economic rent, you're demeaning economic rent. You shouldn't call it rent-seeking if what you mean by it is theft, or booty-seeking, or taking, or something like that. Another one is this political marketplace. This is very, very prevalent in economics, especially among public choices. There's no political marketplace, that's theft. And to call it political marketplace is to conflate all sorts of, just one distinction between voluntary and coercive action. But that is the main libertarian distinction between voluntary and coercive action. Another one is they call it conceptual unanimity. When you hear conceptual unanimity, check your wallet. There's no conceptual unanimity. I mean, either the goddamn thing is unanimous or it's not. And they're trying to get across this justification of the state on the basis of conceptual unanimity. Others are collective goods. Collective is, a bunch of friends get together and pool the restaurant bill. What they mean is that if it's collective, it's it's government. Another one is democracy. They're always on and on about democracy. Well, Hans Hoppe is the point person, no, not the point person, the point man on that particular issue. He's shown very eloquently that, what democracy really is. Tyranny of the majority. Public sector is another one. Collective goods. Now, the one about human capital, I'm not sure of. I have to think and maybe ask for your advice on this. On the one hand, you sort of see what it means. On the other hand, it was created by Gary Becker. And Gary Becker was my thesis advisor, and, there's lots of problems there with that I'll get into sometime. On the one hand, you can see what he means. On the other hand, it's skills, and on the third bad hand, it's denigrating the structure of production and putting it in this neoclassical supply and demand instead of structure of production. Now, we've been very careful about exploitation of the Marxists and scabs of the leftists, but I think it behooves us to be careful of the schmodals as well. Who was it saying the British are coming, Patrick Henry or somebody? Paul Revere. I'm not a historian. Well, I say the schmodals are coming. The schmodals are coming. Be careful. Thank you.
Well, after such a non-controversial lecture, good time we don't have much time for questions. Tom Wirth.
Okay, Dr. Gluck, my question is as follows. I think it's possible to have something that is basically good, like Rothbardian property rights analysis, but not good in every single situation. For instance, there are 17th and 18th century philosophers who thought they could use math and geometry to explain morality, for instance. I mean, that was not helpful. There are economists who think they can use math and calculus today in their field. We know it's not useful. But they're taking something that we know is good, they're just simply trying to apply it to everything. Likewise, science is good, but if I wrote my fiancée a letter saying, Dear Heather, I love you very much, and I've organized the 16 ways in which I love you into 4 categories, 2 subcategories each in a pie graph, I get punched in the face. Likewise, the love I have for my town, I can't explain with a mathematical equation. But that doesn't mean math is bad. It simply means it can't be extended to every aspect of life. So my point is that I don't think that those of us who disagree with your analysis about women and their children, thinking in terms of parasites and eviction, I completely reject that way of thinking, but I don't think that therefore I'm any less a part of the movement, because on that point I think the extension of property rights analysis is just grotesque. You know what I mean? I mean, I don't want to feel like I'm being drummed out of the movement for that. And I think
I'm a big tent kind of guy. Look, when I first came into this movement, it consisted of people in Murray's living room, and there must have been about 10 or 12 of us in the whole world. And now there are only tens of thousands. I'd like to see millions. So I'm not trying to say that you're not a libertarian. I believe that anyone who answers the libertarian quiz, that smallest political quiz in the upper right-hand quadrant, which I'm sure would encompass everyone here, is a libertarian. I'm not trying to drum anyone out of the movement. What I'm trying to do, as you accurately see, is to apply Rothbardianism to the ends of the earth. Now, if I can be shown that it doesn't work, I'll stop. There are some issues where I disagree with Murray. I haven't mentioned them here. I didn't think it was the appropriate point. But you can't get away with the criticism of applying Rothbardianism to everywhere by giving me these analogies. You have to say, well, look, Rothbardianism doesn't work here. And you're not saying that, or at least you haven't now. And if I'll look forward to getting something in writing from you. If you can show me I'm wrong, I'm not a Rothbardian on that issue. So I don't have this religious, cultish thing, Rothbard über alles. You have to apply them, otherwise you're evil. But on the other hand, Murray is brilliant, and I try to apply them, and if it doesn't work, then I stop. But until I'm shown that it's wrong, I'm not going to stop, because you can't send your fiance a certain letter, and maybe you're wrong on that. I don't know. There's methodological individualism here.
When you talk about...
You shouldn't have called on him.
With reparations, which I prefer to call restitution, it seems to me that you're engaging in theft. And the reason is that what you want to do is return the land. Now, you said before that what was stolen was the labor services. What the non-payment for labor services is money. So it seems to me that if a debt was owed at the time, in other words, when a plantation, the slaves were freed and all, the owner should have had to compensate them in money. If he had a large enough bank account that he didn't have to sell his land, he gives the slaves the money, that's the end of it. Now, if he dies, the debt passes on down to his children, but provided only that they have inherited more money from him than the debt, because your parents can't saddle you with a debt, saddle you with a debt like that. So it seems to me that you're attaching all of this to the real estate takes you off in the wrong direction.
I agree with you partially, insofar as they don't have enough money, then we go to the land. But I would agree with you that if you could get the value of what they stole with the appropriate interest rate and all, and the great-grandson had it in money, he could give it to him in money. So I spoke loosely, and I stand corrected by you. It need not be land. It could be any valuable consideration.
I was wondering if your reparations analysis would apply to other instances of theft, for example, taxation. So we get our money back from the people who have been benefiting from it or receiving the tax money for the past 50, 70 years.
Oh, you're darn tootin'. I've got an article coming out of, I forget what I call it, something about stringing them up by certain parts of their anatomy. And it certainly follows that. Yes, taxes are theft, and reparations should be made from the ruling class to the victimized group. Absolutely. I don't regard that as a reductio. I regard that as a wonderful implication of what I'm saying.
Just to follow up a little bit on the first...
People stand up so everyone can hear you.
Just to follow up on the first question that some of this is a bit epicycling, trying to apply a concept that is very much at home someplace to other places where it's not. Take the word eviction. Usually when you evict somebody, you first give them a notice. You have some sort of a relationship where a lease specifies all sorts of procedures and so on. But you can't do that with a fetus or an unborn child or whatever you want to call it. So this is why some of us are uncomfortable applying those concepts that have a perfectly good natural application in certain contexts with adults negotiating with each other, signing leases, contracts, and so on. And then suddenly it's being applied to these unconscious beings that are being eventually not evicted, but extracted from the womb and put out there to die. Now, I don't know exactly whether that's a good language, but I do have a sense that the other language is unfitting.
Well, I might be convinced to change the word from eviction to whatever it is we do with trespassers, and maybe we don't evict trespassers, maybe we expel them. Judith Jarvis Thompson had this wonderful case where you wake up in the morning and there's an umbilical cord attached from your kidney to some guy in bed with you, and you wake him up and you say, you know, how'd you get here? He said, I don't know, I went to bed last night in the hospital and I woke up here, I'm innocent. Do you now, who are now attached to this person, have the obligation not to detach yourself from him or evict him from you or expel him from you? I think you do. I think it's a perfectly good extrapolation of Murray Rothbard's property rights to a very ticklish question. I've never heard a better analysis of the abortion issue. I might be convinced that eviction isn't the right word, but then I would use expellation or whatever other word that would be like that, what you do to trespassers.
That's all.
Very good.